loves a parade. And if there is one parade that is uniquely American, it's this one, held on a uniquely American holiday, Thanksgiving. For millions of Americans crowding the streets of Manhattan or watching it on television, the parade has become as much a Thanksgiving tradition as the turkey dinner. And by tradition, the Christmas shopping season is not supposed to start until all this is over. It is known as the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. It may be called Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, and New Yorkers may claim it as their own, but it really belongs to the world. Every year, year after year, people come from all over to be part of it.
Seattle.
Franklin, Tennessee.
Florida.
Florida.
You're kidding me.
No.
Happy Thanksgiving and stepping off the...
And every year, rain or shine, snow or storm, they are treated to one of the grandest sights that has ever moved down a city street. Everything seems to jump out at you, especially the monster-sized helium-filled 6-story high balloons. Each of them, Big Bird, Barney, the Rugrats, strain at their nylon leashes, pulling at the imaginations of children and drawing the cheers of rooting partisan crowds. Children never seem to know what to focus on. The balloons, the floats, the bands, the clowns. It all just keeps coming down the parade route, hour after hour.
Baby Bob! Baby Bob!
The parade plunges through the canyons of New York, first along Central Park West for about a mile, before connecting with one of the most famous streets in the world, Broadway, which cuts across Manhattan on a diagonal, a process that makes all those squares New York is famous for. Times Square, for instance. It's at one of those squares that it all comes to a halt. Herald Square, formed as Broadway cuts across 6th Avenue and the side streets of 34th and 33rd, the site of Macy's flagship store. To the casual viewer, it might appear that a bunch of bands, floats, and balloons just sort of got together and headed down the street. But it takes planning and logistics, along with military precision, to bring it all off. And like any operation, you have to start with people.
I'd stand on an elevator and I would say, anybody on the elevator want to be in the parade? And they'll look at me like I'm crazy at first, and then, yeah, I'm serious.
Almost all those people down there, handling all those floats and balloons, are volunteers. 4,000 of them, a crazy quilt of willing hands pulled from Macy's stores around the country. Recruiting begins for the next parade almost as soon as the last parade ends.
You know, I always use the Tom Sawyer approach. When I see someone in the elevator or I see someone on the street, I always tell them I got more than enough, but I might be able to squeeze them in.
That approach must work. The parade is never hurting for volunteers to guide the floats and balloons down to Herald Square every year. A favorite job for volunteers is to be a clown for the day, frolicking and joking with the crowd along the parade route. Clown school, like all the preparations for the parade, starts months before Thanksgiving Day. And a final reminder.
What's the most important thing you need to do in the beginning of the day?
Go to the...
Dealing with 1 million people live is a pretty incredible experience, to have that much energy being thrown towards you and you be able to reflect it back and bring joy to all those people. Yeah, I mean, the excitement. Clowning's all about a special energy, and with that many live people, that energy becomes even higher and higher.
For the millions of people watching on television, the parade kicks off at 9 o'clock Thanksgiving morning. Or if you're on the West Coast, 6 o'clock.
Like 6 inches?
But it's not that simple. It really starts coming together the night before. Late on Wednesday night, Thanksgiving Eve, the floats, balloons, and marching bands begin arriving in Manhattan. For hundreds of technicians, Macy's officials, volunteers, and band members, it's the longest and most hectic night of the year.
The night before the parade, I get no sleep. That is true of a lot of my key organization people. When we get up on Wednesday morning, we know that from that point on, we're going to be going straight through until the parade is over.
Thanksgiving Eve produces a magical sight as the parade floats sit silently on Central Park West like battleships in line astern. It's a moment full of the promise of the next day. Parade Eve is the culmination of thousands of hours of work, an odyssey that for some participants begins years earlier. These participants, for example. This is the Redlands High School Band of Lewisberry, Pennsylvania. They were one of 300 high school and college bands from around the country applying for only 12 slots in the 1998 parade.
As I remember, it was a little artsy, but it was impressive. And it was just immediately, you could tell by the work and the style of the band that they were going to bring a fabulous performance within it, and it was a really creative group.
Getting accepted by Macy's was the first step. The hard work and creative demands were just beginning.
46, 45, 46, 47, 48, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, stop. Now, check your dot here.
Band director Frank Schreiner and his staff would now face their toughest job, getting the 130 members of the band ready for its toughest audience. A bunch of New Yorkers, 1 million tourists, and countless more millions watching on television.
I mean, you're on national television, everyone's seeing you. It's not just a little competition in a town that no one's heard of.
Her name is Katie Dorer, 14 years old. She wields a tuba 1/3 her own weight and personifies the sort of determination it takes to get a band into the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade.
I started in February, and then the parade was in November.
That's right. She picked up a tuba for the first time in February 1998 to play on national television just 9 months later.
She signed up for bodybuilding to carry the tuba long distances. She worked so hard. She practiced very, very hard. Several times marching in our front yard at night, counting off paces. Yes, it became part of everyday life, band. Everything's band.
I pretty much had to just practice at home, and I played along with the band and learned from the other guys in my section.
Why did she choose, of all things, a 40-pound tuba, the heaviest brass instrument in the band?
I like the sound of it. I like the lower sounds. I don't want to play the trombone and have that long thing out there.
The little band that could, from Pennsylvania, had special music written for it and came up with a routine designed for a New York City street. A chaotic traffic jam.
With the band, well, there were a lot of dissonance, kind of honking on the horns a little bit, and the band members came into tight little clumps as if traffic stopped.
They practiced their traffic jam routine over and over, from a hot summer when other kids were on vacation and into the freezing November autumn when there were surely warmer things to do at night and on weekends. And that wasn't all. The kids had to help raise money for the trip to New York. And parents and friends pitched in with projects like this chicken dinner fundraiser. Every band member had to raise $260 for their Day of Glory in the 1998 parade. On the night before that parade, as the Redlands students waited for a last-minute rehearsal in Herald Square, something was coming to life 2.5 miles back uptown at the beginning of the parade route. It's something the average television viewer never sees, a tradition almost as revered as the parade itself. People come from all over the country to stand here in the dark, sometimes shivering against the cold, to watch the famous balloons being inflated on the side streets off Central Park West near the Museum of Natural History.
All of New York seems like Thornton Wild is our town. Everybody's hanging out the windows, and a city that's supposed to be so unfriendly is immensely friendly, and people are waving, and the kids, and throngs of people, and lights in the streets, and lined up these hallucinatory balloons lying all flat and gassed out, and then one by one they get worked on.
It's a lot of fun for the midnight onlookers, but it's a little more complicated than blowing up a balloon for your birthday party. Each balloon has multiple and separate chambers and a precise inflation sequence. Each helium truck is equipped with 3 separate hoses to attach to the correct chambers. The netting, the ropes, and the pressure valves are checked one last time. Then, the moment arrives. The process goes on for hours, and many kids of all ages go sleepless to watch the city streets fill up with the shapes and forms of magical creatures and superheroes.
This man is your husband, to love, to honor, and to cherish him.
It is not unusual for some people to use the occasion for something, well, not usually done like this.
With this ring, I thee wed, and I pledge thee, my enduring love.
Here in the dark of the night before, the 1998 parade promises to be a great one. New floats, new balloons, a regiment of clowns, and great bands, such as the one from Lewisberry, Pennsylvania. But all week long, there has also been the threat of something that could disrupt it all.
As we've had a chance to get to know this storm a little bit better watching it to the west, it looks like this one is going to hold together and not going to be a very nice morning. Bottom line, if you're headed to the parade, you need heavy clothes and a raincoat because we've got a cold wind chill.
If the bad weather hits as expected, it will be these balloon handlers who will feel it the most.
Things like that. So it's very important, again, that you listen to what the pilot says. The pilot's going to give you the directions in terms of how the wind conditions are going to be, and you need to make the changes. You should have a little bit of slack. It should not be a tight line. It should not be tense.
The routine has been drilled into them for months, and now they get their marching orders for the last time. Of the 4,000 volunteers, these balloon handlers have the toughest job today. It's not easy to wrestle these monsters through windswept city canyons, and there's a lot at stake. It takes about $250,000 for a sponsor to get a balloon into the parade. The sponsors for the 1998 parade may not know it, but the stormy weather has put their investments in jeopardy. It is just a few hours now before the fateful 1998 parade is scheduled to get underway. The balloons in the staging area on West 77th Street just off Central Park West are being topped off. And New York City and Macy's officials have everything under control. Everything except the one wild card in all of this, the weather. At first, no one had been worried. That's because of a superstition some balloon captains have to gauge the weather for parade day.
The last test flight before the parade, we always say that the weather on that day is the weather that's going to be for the parade. It was a beautiful day on that test flight, and we all were sure it was going to be a beautiful day.
But this year, the parade gods deal the balloon captains a joker. The wind kicks up, and despite the frantic efforts of the handlers, starts whipping the balloons around, driving them towards tree branches and lampposts, which can rip open the skin and deflate the plans of sponsors along with the balloon. The first casualty is an American favorite.
This past year, Garfield just deflated. It busted a chamber inside, and we had to pull it out of the parade. It wasn't because it was unsafe, it just couldn't fly.
It's ironic that the entries that give the parade its unique flavor, the balloons, are the very ones that seem to be the biggest problems. But it wasn't always that way. In fact, flying balloons safely in bad weather wasn't a concern of the early Macy's parades, simply because there were no balloons. The first parade in 1924 instead featured Macy's employees in costumes and carrying giant papier-mâché masks. Some experts say that the first Macy's parade was a spontaneous idea of the employees. But historians say it was a commercial gambit to win business away from rival department store Gimbel's and, like a Pied Piper, lure new customers into the store on 34th Street.
The Macy Parade was designed to cultivate consumer interest, and in particular, the consumer interest of children. That is, adults would be appealed to through children.
Macy's strong suit in the 1920s was its enormous toy department. To showcase the toys in the new parade, Macy's designers came up with the idea for huge rubber zeppelins modeled on popular cartoon characters of the time and filled with helium. The first giant to emerge was Felix the Cat in 1927. And later came a parade favorite, Mickey Mouse. Back in those days, the balloons were released at the end of the parade, with a Macy's reward for anyone who found the deflated balloon skin. Over the years, Macy's balloons proved to be a masterstroke. They captured the imagination not only of New York's children, but of families across the country. It's difficult to say how much these balloons had to do with it, but arch-rival Gimbel's is not around anymore, and the dirigibles have become the signature feature of the Macy's Parade.
What they managed to do by year in, year out, building on the parade, making it more and more spectacular, adding new components to it, was to do what they planned to do, which was to get the store into the cultural memory of New York. Time proved that they were able to get it into the cultural memory of the country. In 15 years, you can think of the Miracle on 34th Street or whatever. This was a brilliant success.
That classic movie, Miracle on 34th Street, used Macy's Santa Claus, the central character of its parade, in a fantasy about St. Nick's existence. Hollywood cemented the parade and its department store creator into American pop culture. The parade's success as an American tradition is not lost on today's advertisers. As many as 30 commercial sponsors appear in each parade.
It's an event. It's an event in which we can put our brand icon out in the public. The event is nationally televised. Also, it's the event in New York City, and New York City is our headquarters. So therefore, we receive a lot of brand exposure.
They believe in the parade. They know it is a very positive American tradition. It's good for their image like it's good for Macy's image. And that they understand the guidelines, which is our parade is entertainment for children.
Sponsors can pay $250,000 to have a balloon built and entered in their first parade, then about $90,000 per year to keep it in subsequent parades. And that's a good deal.
Well, let me put it this way. A television commercial, one network television commercial in the parade would cost about $250,000, and by that standard, a balloon's a bargain.
Parade balloons are sometimes a part of a much bigger public relations effort. In 1997, the Bell Atlantic Company merged with NYNEX in a $23 billion deal, then the second largest business merger in history. As a logo, the company adopted a character from Maurice Sendak's children's story, Where the Wild Things Are.
The people who need it most. Wild things are happening. Bell Atlantic.
We were strategizing. How do we take something that's big and intimidating and make it more inviting?
This Thanksgiving, Bell Atlantic and Macy's give flight to Maurice Sendak's Wild Thing balloon.
A Wild Thing balloon in the Macy's Parade would help sell the new corporation's public image.
If you know the story Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak, it's all about this young child going to this island, being scared by these wild things, but then befriending the wild things and actually becoming their friends. And I think that's exactly what a telecommunications company for the next century wants to stand for.
When Maurice Sendak heard that his character might be made into a balloon in the Macy's Parade, in a strange way, it brought his career full circle. back to his Brooklyn childhood, visiting the Macy's parade with his parents.
Any trip from Brooklyn to New York was like going from Earth to Mars, a transcendental experience. Macy's and the building at Macy's and the Empire State Building and things floating in the sky were just an extraordinary event for a kid, as they still are, obviously. Who could have imagined that I'd get up in the air someday?
Transforming the wild thing from a 4-inch paper drawing into a balloon which will tower over Broadway needed the expertise of Macy's designers and a trip by Sendak to the Macy's Parade Studio. This is Macy's Magic Workshop, a converted Tootsie Roll factory in a rundown section of the Hoboken Docks in New Jersey. But behind the industrial facade is a children's fantasy land of parades, past and present. This is where Garfield and Big Bird and Bart Simpson hibernate for the year between parades. And it is here that new life is breathed into each and every new giant balloon. It's a careful craft and a meticulous process. The first step for every Macy's balloon is into the third dimension, from paper drawing to clay model. These half-inch scale models, in turn, become the precise blueprints for the balloons. The models are crafted by this man, chief designer and balloon midwife, Manfred Bass. He's worked on Macy's balloons since 1962. It's the only job he's ever had. Today, Bass and his team are working with Maurice Sendak to bring the wild thing into the 1998 parade. Bass makes sure that the balloon meets parade specifications. For example, the wild thing's arms must be shortened so they don't catch on obstacles along Manhattan's streets.
Yes, but we can. But can we move them up?
Despite drawing in his claws, Sendak ensures that the wild thing stays, well, wild.
You should be looking down and sort of being calm and go say, boo. So say boo, your arms have to go up higher. You see how high?
Next, the wild thing gets a coat of paint. The balloon skin itself is cut from super strong urethane-coated nylon, made in a factory in South Dakota. Finally, the completed vessel is ready for inflation, and the wild thing comes alive. Each balloon must be aerodynamic and tough enough to take a Manhattan mauling on parade day. They are designed with multiple internal chambers so that a single puncture mid-parade is not necessarily fatal. Safety was the main concern of the technicians trying to get the balloons ready for the 1998 parade. That was because of something that had happened 1 year before, in 1997. Something that had threatened the continued staging of the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. It's Thanksgiving Day, 1998. The terrible weather forecast was not scaring off the parade.
All right, guys, let's move it up here, please.
And it certainly wasn't going to scare off the Redland High School band from Lewisberry, Pennsylvania. They had waited too long for this. They had rehearsed way past midnight in Herald Square. Now, here they were at their staging area on Central Park West, 8 o'clock in the morning, waiting for their day to begin.
I'm so excited. I mean, we've been low on sleep, but I'm just going. I'm so hyper. I can't wait to perform and march down the street in front of everybody. It's going to be great.
On the other side of that very wet coin on Thanksgiving morning was another group not scared off by the weather, the spectators. Down the entire 2.5-mile route, hundreds of thousands waited patiently for the parade to begin. As uncomfortable as the rain may be, it is the wind that makes officials feel so uncomfortable. Historically, it has always been the wind whipping the balloons around that causes the problems. In the early parades, in fact, it appears that the balloons handled the handles instead of the other way around. The technology used to get the balloons downtown in those days was pure human muscle. But for many onlookers, the duel between the balloon teams and the gusty winds was almost a spectator sport, a fun thing to look at. Until 1997, that is. That was the year the winds caused a tragedy that threatened the continued existence of the parade itself. 1997, too, had started with a bad weather forecast.
Macy's, Gene McFadden, they're talking about gusty winds for Thanksgiving.
Yep. Wait, but here's the good news. We're prepared. Inasmuch as I don't want to take the wind lightly, it is a challenge, and we'll probably sustain more damage than we normally would. But rain, sleet, or snow, this parade is ready to fly.
Among the crowds gathering that Thanksgiving morning, there was little thought of danger. Many were returning to familiar perches along Central Park West. They were about to see an unfamiliar sight. By now, the wind had picked up, and they watched as one balloon lurched drunkenly into a lamppost. One spectator had a sudden sense of foreboding.
And I said, you know, that really hit that post, and this looks a bit dangerous. So I actually moved. And sure enough, a half hour later, here comes the Cat in the Hat balloon, which is one of the larger ones.
There was loud applause as the Dr. Seuss character approached 72nd Street, a favorite spot for spectators. The wide cross street forms a powerful wind tunnel effect. The balloon teams had to run a kind of gauntlet, pulling at their balloons with the huge crowd cheering encouragement.
And so they would brace themselves, you know, really hunker down, and then the guy would give a series of short whistles, and they would run with the balloon. Well, it hit, and it sort of bounced off the lamppost, but then another gust of wind pushed it right back down on it, and that's when it just snapped and came down.
The broken lamp shot into the crowd, injuring several people. It was the worst accident in parade history. A young woman was hospitalized with brain injuries, sparking negative press headlines and a $385 million lawsuit against Macy's and New York City. As good as the parade is for Macy's and other advertisers, it's even better for the city. New York thrives on tourism, and on Thanksgiving Day alone, tourists spend an estimated $20 to $30 million. So the public image of the parade and the city had to be protected. A mayoral task force was set up to examine past procedures.
It surprised me how these balloons were operated. There had been times in the history of the parade where some of the handlers had a tough time holding the balloons. As big as they were, as strong as they might have been, these balloons did tend to sway too much left to right.
The city ordered changes in the parade. Perhaps the most important, a strict size limit on balloons. No balloons could now be taller than 70 feet high. That meant some balloons, Bart Simpson for one, would have to be retired. And on Parade Day in 1998, the New York City Police, for the first time, would be on scene to make the final decision on which balloons would fly and which ones would sit on the bench.
If the weather conditions really are too severe, then we just are not going to tolerate the balloons being flown at all.
What is critical, that lift can be anywhere from 400 to 600 pounds of pull. So it meant a lot of energy from the handler team was going into just holding this balloon down.
There were other important changes. Balloon handlers would each undergo a physical exam.
Okay, so this means the people further back. Ready?
And there would be extensive new training techniques and new technology for the old art of handling those troublesome balloons in those equally troublesome winds. Much of the new technology for the 1998 parade was tested here at a New Jersey sports stadium months earlier. For the first time, these little green tractors would supply the muscle to keep the balloon's feet on the ground.
We came up with a special system that's a combination John Deere, mover, aircraft technology and the attachment to the balloon, yachting technology and the attachment of the line to there with a capstan that can be controlled so that it can do all of the very, very, very unique things that we needed to do. Because you can't go to the store and say, hey, I need a Macy balloon anchor.
And now there would be new communications procedures, so the whole balloon crew could react instantly in case of emergency.
This year we have 12 balloons that are in the parade, and each one has their own frequency. The pilot, the two assistant pilots, and the captain all have headsets. So if now, instantly, everyone around the balloon will hear what's going on.
The headset would help the balloon teams to steer in gusty winds. At each street intersection, a volunteer with a wind meter would radio information back to the approaching balloon. So 1998 was going to be the test for this new, improved Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. No one could know just how tough that test would be. A cold November rain is falling when the Redlands High School band steps off to be part of the fateful 1998 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade.
We were all soaked even before the parade began. We had tried to warm up for the parade, but we couldn't because the wind was just too bad.
Just terrific. To give up your holiday and march in Macy's Thanksgiving.
It wasn't too cold at the beginning, but as you got through, you got more wet, and you started just kind of shivering a little.
What many of the band members did not know was they hadn't even started yet. They stepped off at 82nd Street, but they would not officially be in the parade until they reached its start point at 77th Street. They were playing their hearts out for about 5 blocks when they heard an announcement.
Birthday great. Redland High School Marching Band coming to the line. Redland High School Marching Band, please join the parade.
I thought we were already in the parade. I didn't know about that, so we're just marching down. It's like Redland, join the parade, and that just really gets you pepped up. And then you start playing. You're just lost in the moment. It's great.
So we start marching and playing, etc., and it's pouring. It's pouring rain.
As the band steps over the official start point at West 77th Street, they do not have time to look down the side street to see the drama unfolding there. That's where the wild thing is. West 77th is one of the streets used to ready balloons for the parade. And the wild thing is ready.
The morning of the parade, it's really easy to focus. You know, there's one task in front of you, and that is getting the balloons launched and getting them down the line of march. Once it starts, it's like a freight train, and before you know it, it's over.
Despite the rain, despite the wind, despite Garfield's demise, hopes are high that the wild thing will carry the day. The netting has been discarded, the little tractors attached, and the balloon handlers are a picture of eagerness. The wild thing is already a favorite. It's not even in the parade yet, and spectators stay on the side street to watch it make its debut. Right on time, the handlers start moving the wild thing towards the parade route.
Walk in, take up slack. Walk in, take up slack.
Onlookers cannot believe what happens next. A crosswind shoves the wild thing into a lamppost, puncturing a vital section of the balloon. Parade director Gene McFadden and chief designer Manfred Bass are quickly on the scene.
I want these balloons down. That's what I've been doing. Bring them all the way out. And 25 is too high and really down. Okay.
Although only one section is punctured, it is too damaged to fly, and it has to be manually deflated as quickly as possible and taken down. The wild thing, despite the expensive advertising campaign built around it, will not be seen on national television. Not in the 1998 parade.
Are you sad? Because the wild thing broke. You'll come back.
But the parade, like the show, must go on. The clowns, floats, bands, cheerleaders, and yes, the remaining balloons keep coming down Central Park West and on to Broadway from what appears to be a rainy parade factory somewhere back up the street. It just never stops. And after the problems on the side streets that disable a few balloons, everybody else just leans into the wind and puts their best foot forward.
When rain like that comes, or weather condition like that comes, it's like everybody's on their best. The clowns, the things that like, all of a sudden you rev because you know you got that extra challenge. And spirits were so high that morning. My own spirit, I kind of could have felt, I would have been happier if it had been a little drier.
How's it been working so far?
Local reporters were quick to find that the new techniques practiced after the disastrous parade of last year seemed to be working.
Give you an idea how safe they're keeping things. Bay would normally be about 40 feet in the air.
How's the park been working out? Good. Doing really well.
And with that new communication system, the controlled chaos of the parade became a lot more controlled and a lot less chaotic.
It was overwhelmingly a success. Allowed people to communicate without yelling, allowed them to communicate and tell the people in the rear of the balloon what was going to be happening. It allowed somebody to stand 2 blocks up the street or a block and a half up the street and say there's a wind gust coming. Okay, everyone, be prepared, shift to the right of the street as you get through the intersection. So it was a wonderful addition.
In one sense, the bad weather was exactly what the parade officials needed. It tested all the new safety measures.
We were actually, it was a testament to all the work that we had done and the decisions we had to make and or did make, and the fact that so many of all of the balloons that left the starting line actually made it down without a problem.
With the safety issues settled, everyone now concentrated on having fun. But the little band from Pennsylvania was heading for a real-life traffic jam in Herald Square. The grand finale of the Thanksgiving Day Parade comes as the bands, floats, and clowns spill into Herald Square in front of Macy's historic department store. This is where the main television cameras capture the parade for an estimated 70 million viewers around the world. And this is where all the entrants get a chance to stop and perform their special routines. Traditionally, the arrival here of the final float bearing Santa Claus marks the end of the parade and the beginning of the Christmas shopping season. With so many of the balloons tied to Christmas toys and advertising campaigns, the televised staging is critical.
As they come through, as they approach the area where they're going to go through the main cameras in front of Herald Square, we'll make sure they're flying in the right position, make sure that that if they need to be adjusted in height, either up or down, or if the back is too high or the front's too low, that we're getting them, again, into their pre-staged position.
And this is the big time for the marching bands. Time to strut their stuff on what is literally a global stage.
The Redland High Marching Band is a traffic stopper from the word go. Get this, they have a New York traffic and pedestrian theme. The group's color guard is attired in women's business suits.
It's exciting. You know, here we are, it's Thanksgiving morning, and all the work that we've put into preparing for our performance, the moment's there. The moment of the performance is there.
This year, the weather was playing havoc with the bands. Drenching rain had turned the painted star in front of Macy's into a slick, treacherous ice rink, especially for a high-speed marching sequence like Redlands.
Everyone just got so serious. You didn't hear anything, and you just look ahead and you see the paint start under your feet for the star.
But just as the band members reached their slippery spot, they had their own miracle on 34th Street. The rain had stopped. At least now, they would get to perform their New York traffic jam routine without drowning.
It was a fast-paced routine, so we always had to be kind of aware of the people around us so we didn't run into anyone.
And true to life, the traffic jam came with its own fender bender. Then it was over for them. But it was just beginning for those responsible for getting the show on the road for next year's parade. And the wild thing, despite the accident, or maybe because of it, would be back.
There was press coverage of the fact that the balloon went down, and I think we probably got more attention in the press than we would have if we had a successful flight down Broadway, which, of course, we would much rather have had. It was unfortunate, but I think it just makes next year's parade that much more something to look forward to.
Months after the 1998 parade, on a cold February morning in New Jersey at the Macy's Parade Studio, Manfred Bass and Jim Artle are doing what they do best. They're blowing up balloons. Today, they're preparing something called a chamber test, checking to see if the newly repaired seals and balloon chambers are fully airtight. Listening to a balloon skin is the kind of skill that comes with 15 years as a Macy's craftsman.
I love what I do. I absolutely adore what I do. There's something about being able to play with these things all year long. I mean, my 7-year-old daughter goes to school, and her friends say, "What does your dad do for a living?" And he plays with balloons.
The wild thing may look his former self, but Bass and Artle need proof. New York's a tough town, and it's a long way from Central Park down to Herald Square. The next time the wild thing starts, he's got to finish.
The parade ends at noon, so between 6 a.m. and noon is 6 hours. So if this balloon stays on the floor and maintains pressure for 6 hours, we're reasonably certain it's going to make it from uptown all the way downtown and be looking good when it goes through camera.
The wild thing passes its test with flying colors. It's ready to soar with the other balloons in upcoming parades and join the thousands of returning Macy's volunteers who will trade another hard year of training and preparation for a magic-filled moment on the Great White Way. It's hard work, but somebody's got to do it.
But really and truly, the most exciting thing about the parade is walking down Broadway between millions of people, and you get the two sides of the street cheering with each other, and you hear kids saying, "Ooh, look at that, Mommy!" And it really is just an incredible sensation. That 1 2-hour period is what makes me want to come and do it over and over again.
And somewhere in America, young musicians are practicing scales long into the night, clutching a dream that one day they too might march in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade.
And even as I spoke with my 6th grade band just this week about coming here, they were asking, well, will we get to be in the Macy's Parade when we're in high school? And I told them, well, there's a 6-year wait before you can apply again. And of course, the wonderful mathematicians that they are, 6th grade, 6 years, I'll be a senior, so we can be in the Macy's Parade when we're a senior.
And even for that big kid who didn't quite make it his first time out, the magic is still there.
But to be part of that good, solid Thanksgiving Day parade tradition is wonderful. It is literally, you can be cynical about it, you can be anything you like, but it's a glorious thing to be part of something as good as that. It is good. There's nothing ambiguous about that situation. It's just a damn good thing.